welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. So this is only a slightly late, because I have almost fully caught up, wrap up for the month of January 2024. So I know I've fallen slightly behind with the job hunting and all the stuff that I have going on, but I'm trying to get caught back up and get back on the horse for doing one video a week. And so I'm trying to stay on track with that in the near future, just to have a little bit more consistency. But this is a hobby and it's supposed to be fun. So when things aren't fun, maybe I won't post. So we'll just see how it goes. But without anything else, let's just jump straight into our statistics for the month of January. So in January, I read 10 books, totaling 5,873 pages and 66.75 audiobook hours. And this gave me an average rating of 3.75, which is not horrible. It's not the best. It's kind of like a slightly above average reading month, which I'm totally fine with. And we do have quite a few books to talk about. So without any other preambles, let's just jump straight into the books, shall we? So as always, we will go in ascending star order from my least favorite read of the month all the way up to my favorite read of the month. So in last place, surprising nobody, with 2.5 stars is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is book 5 in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, I want to say. This is Nesta's healing book or whatever, and just so I have problems on multiple levels with this one. So first of all, the dynamics between Nesta and Cassian, I don't buy into. Like, I am always one who doesn't love a fated mage trope to begin with, but I feel like in this book in particular, we lean on it as a crutch to explain forced romance development between two characters that I don't feel any kind of compatibility between. And we spend like 800 pages just having smutty scenes with people that I don't feel have any real relationship development happening, at least not that I was feeling. So like that was one thing. The second thing is I was listening to the graphic audio, which I would not recommend for smutty books unless you just want to giggle. So like if you're into it for the smut, then like maybe you'd be into the graphic audios, but for me, they just made me crack up because you can say whatever you want about these graphic audio narrators, but they get very into their roles. So when we're having all the growling and like they are making the sounds and doing the thing. So there was that. And then just what I loved so much about A Court of Mist and Fury was the relationship dynamics between Feyre and her romantic partner. I keep trying to avoid saying their name just in case people don't know, but like they had such a sweet dynamic, and male romantic partner was so supportive of her and like her trauma and her visceral like phobia of being trapped, that then with how he put a literal bubble around her, not even letting her friends hug her, it was just like such a 180 in their dynamic. And I know people are like, oh, well, that's because of the, and I'm like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, that's such a fundamental change in the way that they interact. And like, there's no world in which somebody has that strong of a phobia about being contained or trapped or controlled, and having a literal force field around them wouldn't trigger that. They'd be just like, sure, it's fine, I understand. Like, absolutely not. And then the buffoonery that is Nesta. So she has this arc where she is put up in the training castle, whatever it is, at the top of a mountain, and it has 10,000 stairs to get down to the city. And she's told, well, if you can get all the way down, then you can go drink or do whatever, because it's basically like an intervention for her in this book. And like, I don't understand the physics of this, and maybe I just didn't understand. So somebody understands this way more than me. But she would always talk about how hard it was to get down a certain number of stairs. She would get down like 100 stairs or 200 stairs, but we would never talk about going back up. So I'm confused about how we get exhausted going down 500 stairs, but have no issues getting back up. Like, what? Like, I don't understand. Like, literally, it is so many times of her struggling on this staircase, and then whatever his name is it Cassian, asking, how far did you get this time? And she'd be like, 500. And I'm like, okay, but like we only see her struggling and like gasping for breath going downstairs. I'm like, but then it never talks about her struggles going up. It's just like, oh yeah, and then she went back. It's like, wait, what? So yeah, I mean, I found it quite frustrating. I do think that some of the female friendships that Nesta develops with the librarians of various pasts, I think were really sweet. And I did enjoy the end bit with the kind of like being thrown almost into a Hunger Games-esque situation. So there were parts that I found entertaining, but it was just so long, so much like kind of repetitive smut that never felt like a relationship was developing, and it never felt intimate. It felt very much just like wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, which is fine, but not really what I'm looking for in a romance book. That's not romance to me, that's smut. So those are two different things in my opinion, but hey. And then close on its heels was A Court of Frost and Starlight. I gave this one 3 stars because it was fine. It was like the little Christmassy, solstice-y novella where we're just like, what Christmas gift am I going to get for my partner? Like, it was fine. Like, I don't have much to say about it. It is just, I read it and it didn't add anything to the plot. So like, you could definitely skip it if you're not interested in just like a cutesy holiday episode. Basically, it felt like when you were watching Buffy and you had like the random musical episode where all of a sudden everybody is singing and it feels a little out of left field, but it's kind of camp and fun. This, I didn't feel the camp and fun, but I could see it's like a similar thing where it's like this random kind of one-off episode of just like a holiday thing. So, but it's not going to have like huge impact or anything, or at least it didn't for me. Then up next, we're moving into my 3.5 star reads. And the first of those that I'll talk about is, I guess I'll just finish off my ACOTAR books. So I also read A Court of Rings and Ruin, and this is book 3 of the original trilogy. So there's ACOTAR, then there's ACOMAF, then there's ACOWAR, ACOFAS, and ACOSF. So A Court of Rings and Ruin is the main conclusion to the plot threads that we had been following since A Court of Thorns and Roses. And it was a fun enough time. I definitely have some questions about like why there is a here comes the cavalry moment involving their father. Then I'm like, why was I don't understand. It like makes no sense. It's literally like just a plot thing. And like, I didn't understand. I was like, wait, why is your dad here? Okay, I guess. Sure. Like, and there was just like some buildup of some like uber powerful characters or beings in this world that we were kind of gathering the forces to go fight the big bad. And the way that they were handled was just so anticlimactic. It was like, oh, okay, I guess, sure. So like, there was just moments where it was like, we were building up to something that was going to be cool, and then we just kind of undermined ourselves, which is fine, but that's why it only gets 3.5 stars and not more. Then I also continued my journey with the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I read is this 6? The Bonehunters by Steven Erikson, and it was also 3.5 stars. This book was starting to feel a little repetitive to me because Steven Erikson with the Malazan Book of the Fallen definitely wants to hit on the horrors of war. And in this one particular, we're looking a lot at like disease and plague and that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it just feels like a kind of repetitive theming message that he's already given multiple times, like in Dead House Gates. So like since book 2, we've been like hammering home this like horrors of war thing. And I think just that mixed with the state of the world, so the news that I'm reading constantly, it's just like a little much for me at this moment in time. So it's just like, okay, I don't need more of this theme. I understand. But there were some fun character moments. There were some new reveals. I got to see Ikarim and Mappo again. We had some more Karsa Orlong. We're definitely getting like a consistent cast of characters, and it doesn't seem like we're introducing a ton of new ones at this point, which is nice, because up through book 5, we were still introducing like new casts of characters, and I was kind of like, at what point is enough? And there are some cool epic magic battles against different gods and different things like that. So like there were the elements that I enjoy, but just I feel like Erikson, for me, lacks any nuance in the theming because of the way that he does his theming is through these conversations, these philosophical debates between characters. But the conversations, it'd be very difficult to tell which character is saying something. Like if I pulled out a random piece of dialogue, unless it's one of the like over-the-top characters like Krepa or somebody, I don't know that you would be able to tell this was said by this character, because the philosophizing sounds very similar between nations, between characters, between everything. And so it's just a little bit like, okay, I get it. Because it's just like all the time conversations about life and death and war and blah, blah. It's just like it starts to feel repetitive to me, especially when these books are like 1,000 friggin' pages. So it's like, oh my God, we could have cut out a lot of this and still had the same impact for me. But I will say that I don't remember any weird schmeck stuff in this one. So that's nice, because the stuff with Shirk in book 5 was like, excuse me? If you know, you know. There is an anemone that somehow basically implants itself in somebody's no-no place and helps them be revived. It's weird. It's wild. Speaking of wild, my last 3.5 star book for January was The Trials of Empire by Richard Swan. This is the conclusion to the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, which started with the Justice of Kings. And this book in particular kind of doubled down on some of the elements that I liked. So it really goes full force into the weird, like, eldritch horror-y elements to the magic and to the antagonists, and we get to go more into that kind of spiritual world that we kind of dabble in a little bit in book one. So I really like those elements, but I felt like the final confrontation was, for me, a little bit anticlimactic. And just this one starts to get a little bit too philosophize-y for me. And just like, I think philosophical questions are cool and all, but like I'd rather have it be like situations that make me question things and not necessarily like conversations between characters trying to like play out and like force me to see a certain thing. And so like I think sometimes that more heavy-handed philosophical conversation-y stuff is just kind of a miss for me, because that's not necessarily what I'm reading for. I'm kind of reading for fun and to see cool magic and to fall in love with characters and go on like cool quests and like that kind of stuff most of the time. And like I don't disagree with any of the theming or like conversations that they were having. It was just kind of like, I get it. Can we go back to the cool eldritch horror land, please? Like, but that's just me. Like, if you loved books 1 and 2, I would say that this series is pretty consistent in terms of focus and quality. So like if you love book 1, I think you'll love the whole trilogy. It doesn't like fall off a cliff at the end. If you feel lukewarm about book 1, like I kind of did, you'll probably feel lukewarm about the entire series. Like it doesn't really change. It is what it is. So for all those people out there that are probably giving it 5 stars, love that for you. I thought it was a solid conclusion, but it's definitely not like a new favorite series of all time. Then I continued on with the Dark Artifices by Cassandra Clare. So this is the 3rd published series in the Shadowhunters world. There's the Mortal Instruments, then there's the Infernal Devices, then there's the Dark Artifices, and then there's the Last Hours, and then there's like some smattering of some random like short story collections in between. And so Lord of Shadows is book 2 in that 3rd series of hers, and it's kind of a more direct sequel to the original Mortal Instruments series. And I just don't love these characters as much. This one is also very much more like heavily inspired by like current political situations. So there's a lot of questions of like, should we allow these beings that are part demon to be involved, or should we kick them out? And then there's like a hate group that spawns, and it just feels a little like too close to home to be like fun. And just because I don't love these characters quite as much, I'm not quite as invested in all of the drama and the dynamics that are going on between them as I was in the Infernal Devices. Like Infernal Devices is where she peaked for me, and hopefully Last Hours, which is a more direct sequel to that series, will kind of hit it back out of the park like that originals trilogy did. But this one was just fine. And I also feel like it was very much middle book, and these books are obscenely long. Like for what she's doing, it did not need to be, what was it, like 700 or 800 pages? Like, ma'am, please edit it down. Like you were in your sweet spot when we're at like 400 to 500 pages. Love it. But like 700, 800, no ma'am. So it was fine. Like I gave it 4 stars. It was a good enough time, but it's also kind of forgettable time that even now, it's only been like a month, and I retain very little of what happens specifically in this book. I remember more about what happens in the conclusion, but I read the conclusion in February. So it's like, of course it's more fresh. So I don't know that if you didn't like the Mortal Instruments that this would change your mind, and you kind of need the context from the Mortal Instruments because we have some of those characters and a lot of the aftermath of what happened at the end of Mortal Instruments kind of carrying through. Whereas you could definitely read the Infernal Devices kind of in isolation. So yeah, I mean, Cassie Clare is a fun time, and she definitely gives me what I want her to give me. It's very much like fun, campy, like CW show vibes, but it's not like hitting me in the feels like I would love for it to do. Then my only other 4-star read of the month was Faebound by Miss Saara El-Arifi, the author of the Ending Fire trilogy. So the Final Strife and the Battle Drum. And I love the Ending Fire trilogy. Like, it is so good. Faebound was a lot more leaning into like classic fantasy races. So we're kind of in this world where there are elves and fae and humans, and we get a lot about the creation myths of these 3 different beings and how the different gods that form them, because they're each formed from like a different god of like the sun or the moon or the earth. and how that affects the magic that they have. And then there was like battles between the different groups. And so we're starting with, in the beginning of the book, we're following these elves, and these elves are having like a civil war over resources. And then our main character, things happen and she gets exiled, and then we find out more about what's actually going on in this world and finding out a lot about the magic. There's cool animal bonds, and it's just a really interesting twist on these classic fantasy races. But it was a much more heavily romance-focused story with two main romances, and the way that those romances progressed just was a little weird for me. Like, we went a little bit from like 0 to 100, kind of like watching Love is Blind, where you're like, girl, you've known him for 4 days. How are you saying I love you and wanting to get married? Like, it's kind of that energy, which is kind of dramatic and fun enough, but like, it's not really giving me like I'm falling for this relationship and I'm rooting for them, because I'm like, girl, you don't know him, but sure. There is also a sapphic romance, so that's lovely. We love to see all the queer representation. I definitely think it's worth giving a go. It is a really cool world. Just don't necessarily expect the most from the romances, maybe. But there were some twists that I didn't see coming, and it was just a really fun time. And the character banter was entertaining. I just didn't necessarily buy into the romantical bits, and I kind of wish that they were less integral to the story and that we could have focused on more of the cool world building stuff, because we were definitely doing some of that sleuthing to find out what really had happened and like getting more lore. And I kind of love it when people have to do research to find out about the lore. I kind of just really enjoy that trope, and this had a little bit of it, and I would have just liked more of it. But if you like cool animal bonds and cool kind of different twists on classic fantasy races, I think it's really worth giving a go. And then we come to my 3 4.5 star reads of the month. And the first one I'll talk about is Threads That Bind by Kika Hatzopoulou. And please don't sue me if I pronounce that wrong. And this one is a YA story, but it's definitely on like the older end of YA. And I thought it was so much fun. I thought it was also going to be a lot more like Greek mythology inspired, but it's not really. So we're kind of in this world where people can be descended from basically deities of any kind of ancient world religion that you can think of. There's like Ra-born, Hades-born, like all of these different like descendants of deities with magic powers kind of associated with who the deity came from. And so we're following this character who is a descendant of the Sisters of Fate and has this ability to see the threads that bind people to things that they love. So it could be food or people or places or whatever. And she actually has the ability to cut those threads and sever their like emotions for their grandma or whatever it is. And so we fall in because there is a murder mystery happening, and she is a private investigator who has been hired to be on this case. And she ends up getting embroiled in this kind of political coup that's going on in the larger city that she lives in. And so it's just, if you're looking for a fast-paced kind of murder mystery with like fun mythological flavors, but not necessarily like mythological retellings, but you just want a little bit of like Greek mythology flavor, but it's not going to be like Atalanta or any of those that are actual Greek myths, then I can't recommend it more highly. Like, it was so much fun. And I do have the sequel already, and I need to get to it maybe in March or April. I don't think it comes out until June or July, but it is so much fun. So if you want that like private detective, there's not really any like strong romance elements in it whatsoever. We're really focused on this murder mystery and kind of a family drama and just finding out about all these cool things going on in this world. So if that sounds good, like, please, like, do yourself a favor, because it is fantastic. Then the next thing I'll talk about is Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. This is book 1 in the, I don't know the name of the series, but it is very much like, if you are a Gods Among Us person like myself, then you will love this. It's very much like, there are deities of basically everything. There's deities of like broken sandals and war and this particular ocean or that little forest, or like there's just deities everywhere with their shrines and all that kind of stuff. And we start off following this young girl who has a god who's actually attached to her instead of to a shrine. And so we kind of go on this quest with a god killer whose job is usually to kill gods to help her sever this god from her. And so we kind of find out more about, before the book starts, there was this war against the gods in this one nation, and the humans were trying to kind of wipe out the gods there. And so there's kind of like this weird mixture of like people who still hold to their faith in their various gods, and then like the newer era of people who are trying to get rid of the gods and therefore being trained and hired as god killers. And so there's just kind of this interesting political landscape while we're also questing a really just fun banter and dynamics between the god Hunter and the girl, and the god Skedeketh is adorable. He is a god of white lies. And so just all of the deities, all of the cool, like figuring out what's going on, twists, turns galore, and it definitely does not overstay its welcome. It's kind of like, on one hand, I wish that these books were longer because they're very short, like 300 or 400 pages max. But they really pack a punch into those 300 or 400 pages, so you really know these characters, you fall in love with them. There's like just queer normativeness, like there's trans people, queer people, and like it's not a main plot point, it's just people in the background as you're going through the story. There's disability representation because the Godkiller is an amputee, so a lot of talk about her phantom limb and like aches and pains, and just like so much representation, but just as like fleshing out these characters and making them feel more unique and diverse, not like as this is the diverse character and this is the queer character. Like they are just part of these people's perspectives, and we still get to just see them as people, which we love to see. That's how representation should be done, in my opinion. And so it's just so good. And I've already read the sequel Sunbringer, so you can look forward to that I think I read it in March, so you won't get that review for a while, but Sunbringer is just as good and so much fun. So that's all I'll say about that for now. And then we move on to my favorite book of the month, and it was The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This is book 1 in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. It is a classic fantasy series from, I want to say, the 80s. And it just gave me everything I wanted from classic fantasy. So it felt kind of like Game of Thrones and like King Arthur Legends had a baby, and that was the Dragonbone Chair. It is a lower magic world where the magic is more focused on these swords, and we follow a young boy who lives in this castle who gets kind of taken on as apprentice by the kind of eccentric Merlin-esque figure, and then things happen at the castle and he's kind of catapulted out into this larger world conflict against a maybe returning Dark Lord. And so it's very much like those classic fantasy beats, but done so good. And so I'm just so curious to find out more about this world and these magic swords and to go on more of these quests. Simon, the main character, is lovely. I really enjoyed him. And so I'm just looking forward to seeing what's next for him. And it is a trilogy that's already completed, although book 2 seems like it's maybe like 2 books in one because it is massive and people usually read part 1 separately from part 2. So I don't know if it's more like a 4-book situation feeling wise, but it is complete regardless. And so if you like magic swords and just really well done classic fantasy, we are not doing Farm Boy, but kind of, where it's like fish out of water, thrust into events beyond his control, probably a Chosen One-esque vibe. And like, but it's just so good. It's so good. And it's also one of the main inspirations for Game of Thrones, and I can see why. It does have some of that vibe, but it's definitely not as graphic in content as Game of Thrones is, but there are definitely like dark things that happen, and it is just fantastic, and I can't wait to read more. I do have book 2 on deck for March, so hopefully in one of the next times I see you, I can just gush about book 2, and hopefully it just keeps getting better and better throughout this series. But book 1, if you've been sitting on this series for a while, or you're just interested in having that cozy classic fantasy adventure feel, you can't beat the Dragonbone Chair. But that does it for all of the books that I read in the month of January. Please, as always, I'd love to chat with you about any of these books. So feel free to leave comments, including spoiler comments. Just make sure you say spoiler and hit a bunch of enters, because I just love chatting about these books. If you just want to leave an emoji, leave a dragon for the Dragonbone Chair. If you just want to let me know you're here, but you don't necessarily have anything to say. But that will do it for today's video, my friends. So please do all the things. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from me. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!